Welcome to Almost Here, Round the Corner Future Technology podcasts with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies poised to transform our lives for better or worse are the focus of this podcast. Almost here means these technologies are now here and starting to be used, or just around the corner, from Bitcoin to artificial intelligence, 3D printing, blockchain, virtual reality, and more. Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech Podcast. My guest is Errol Denger. He's the Director of Experience-Driven Commerce Program and Strategy at Adobe. And Errol's going to talk about some interesting happenings at Adobe as it relates to them acquiring Magento, which is an e-commerce platform. But I want to say, Errol, hello, and how you doing? Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Rich. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about your background, maybe the last few years and how it led to your working at Adobe.
Oh, well, I guess you could say I'm a commerce geek at heart. Been doing this about 20 years, started at the days of Webvan and, sock puppets, if you remember that. Over the past, yeah, who can forget? But over the past several years, I was at IBM running their commerce practice, and more recently at Adobe, we launched the Experience-Driven Commerce program. So Adobe has a very rich experience cloud, or our marketing cloud, and my team and I have focused on developing the commerce capabilities necessary to support the e-commerce use case. And obviously with that, we then decided to take a more aggressive stance and completely fill the gap through the acquisition of Magento.
So what's experience-driven commerce? What does that mean?
That's a great question. So maybe I'll take it to the highest level and talk about, Experience Cloud and what our strategy is. So, first and foremost,
Sure.
if you think about the world that we play in, there's no such thing as a unique product anymore. In fact, one of my favorite stats is a HBR stat that basically says 98.7% of the value of innovation goes to imitators. Put simply, there's no such thing anymore as having a unique product. What we at Adobe believe is that, experiences are really what differentiate firms. And, those are the things we remember. An experience doesn't always have to be a high fidelity creative, I'll say creative cloud type of thing. Many times they're just subtleties that you don't even recognize, such as, when you're booking a airline ticket, we know that your preference is an aisle seat. Or when you walk into a store and that store associate, knows maybe your size and your style preferences. So what experience-driven commerce is all about is really bringing together rich data and insights, so understanding who you are and where you are in your journey in order to contextually engage you, so leveraging data and bringing that together with content, creative, and processes to create the optimal experience. So a first-time visitor, if you're in discovery phase, we're going to maybe show you rich videos to inspire you, or in B2B to educate you. But after you've purchased, you don't maybe want to see a runway video. Instead, you want to see, this is the accessory, or in B2B, this is the maintenance bundle that would go with the product I just purchased. And so experience-driven commerce brings together Adobe Analytics, the real-time targeting, as well as experience management to deliver those types of experiences.
So can you give an example, one B2B example, one B2C example? What would I see the first time I go to a website versus the second, third, fourth? Or let's say I got it, I put an item in my cart and I got to the end and something happened, my wife called and I closed the browser or something, or I got distracted. And, what kind of experiences will I receive then?
Sure, great question. So let me first answer your exact question, and then I'll give you two other examples, which is, if you put something in your cart and, we will remember, exactly what you were doing and what the context was And maybe if you abandoned it for a long period, we might give you a bit of a nudge by sending you an email reminding you that, those products are still waiting for you. And, similarly, when you come back, trying to pick up where you left off. And, that's sometimes pretty challenging because, again, as you switch channels and as your context evolves, we always have to pick up on those little cues. But to answer your first question, not only, persisting your cart and experience, but as you progress through the experience, actually using the right algorithms to make those relevant recommendations. But to give you some customer examples, you asked B2B and B2C. Maybe the first one I would hit is from B2B, National Instruments. They do semiconductor testing equipment. And one of the things they were struggling with is they literally had too much information. And if you're familiar with the paradox of choice, there was a JAM study that basically illustrates that when faced with too many choices, you slowed down the decision process, and you were actually 1/10 as likely to buy than when you are presented with fewer, cleaner choices. So it's not, can I give you too much? It's giving you the right information. And so National Instruments went from about 44,000 pieces of information to about 4,000. And if you go to their site, what you'd see is each step of the process, there's a 90-second video. They talk you through it. As you make decisions and narrow your choices down, that's automatically integrated into search. And, you keep narrowing down what's called search facets, but, the available options. So it becomes very curated. And then obviously, if you exit and you come back, your session context will, be remembered and you can pick up where you left off. So that's a good B2B example. I think from a B2C perspective, maybe I'll talk about a brand platform. Slightly different example, but maybe someone like Vans. So actually, they're one of my favorite brands because, they're not like a shopping site. They're truly a lifestyle site. And so every few days they're updating, their athletes, their events, their music titles. And so they're giving, their audience a reason to come back.
So for B2C, let's say, I don't know, I'm going to a website and I'm looking at a pair of socks, and I leave. Will I get retargeting? Will I get ads showing me those socks maybe in different colors? Or, hey, with those socks, maybe you want to buy a pair of shoes or a shirt or something like that. I mean, does it do upsells and cross-sells, suggestions, or does it just remind me of what I was about to buy, or does it push FAQs or reviews on the products? Like how adaptive is this thing?
So we will, typically we will, based on what you were looking at and so obviously when you're browsing and we don't have that fully personal relationship with you, we'll look at what you've done and how your cohort or people like you have, who came from, maybe similar upstream sites or did certain things that enabled us to segment you, right? So then what we're going to do is typically try to find the most relevant assortment so that, we're going to bring you back to the site with the right message and assortment. So the simple answer is it depends on how our clients configure the retargeting algorithms. If you're looking at socks, those socks hopefully won't follow you around the internet for 6 weeks. That's why we want to close the loop, right, and understand that you've bought or purchased, but also to kind of give you a slightly more robust response that is going to pique your interest.
Well, how do you follow up? How do you follow up without annoying people or creeping them out? How do you do it effectively? Have you done testing to see what works to move a sale forward versus, cause people to run away?
Yeah, so there's definitely, we are able to set tolerances within our targeting profiles to ensure that, we don't create too much fatigue in a specific message. So the number of touches as well as the timing, all of the, recency and frequency elements are absolutely configurable. And, typically it's by a browser or, or a device. Our clients, maybe will target you once or twice through a medium. And then we might shift to maybe from, let's just say, retargeting to email. But the last thing we want to do is, and our clients want to do, is kind of freak out the consumer that, hey, I looked at something on your site and now you're going to hunt me down everywhere I go across the internet. So it varies by brand strategy, but that is an integral element of a modern programming approach or targeting strategy is, really making sure that you are respectful in your outreach and that you don't create brand fatigue.
What kind of customers do you have for this platform? Are they small, sellers of e-commerce? Are they larger brands? Are they going more for branding or for direct sales? I mean, what's like the range of companies and people that you help?
So I'll answer that question two ways. So for Adobe Experience Cloud, we work predominantly in the mid-market and enterprise space across an exceptionally wide range of, use cases, literally from travel and hospitality and tourism and, all the way through, of course, core commerce, which is what I'm focused on. With Magento, we really expand, more aggressively into some of those mid-market firms. And so the answer is, or I'll say one of the things that we found very compelling and a great synergy is not only Magento's ability to play up market, but also the strength of their mid-market segment and enabling us to really provide, they provide a strong channel into, mid-market firms who actually have the exact same problems as larger enterprises. So, now we want to be able to target them as well. But it's a pretty broad spectrum.
Okay, and I could see if you sell, 10, 20, 30, or hundreds of products. I mean, I don't know how you would do this without automation or without systems like yours. I mean, it's not possible for people to do it all. So is that where you see the power of what you do, or where do you see the biggest benefits of your system?
I think you summed it up well. A lot of these historical systems are process-based or rules-based, I'll say, and we have reached capacity, both in terms of humans' ability to manually enter all of the different scenarios. When I look at the stocks, recommend the shoes. And on top of that, for a system to execute hundreds of layers of rules is an incredibly complex endeavor and not very efficient. So, I think at Adobe, and, that's really the foundation of Adobe Sensei and our data platform is, really understanding that changing context and using the right algorithms and the right AI to drive the outcome. So I think you summed it up very well, is that really is the future. And I would say it's going to continue to evolve.
How much of what you do is AI versus just, setting up a bunch of rules for follow-up? And what have you seen the difference to be?
So I think, I'll say no matter what, there's always going to be a mix. So let's just break AI down, and it's three constituent elements, right? So the first is no algorithm is effective unless you really have a broad view of the customer and data. So our data platform brings together a very robust view. So then the next piece to answer your question. So first is you need, 360-degree view, multi-dimensional data. Then it's, rules. And so before you run the algorithm, you're going to actually utilize a filtration set utilizing different targeting rules. So that will determine, obviously, I can give you an offer that I know you would accept 100% of the time. And that is, if I give you 100% off or some ridiculous discount, you are going to, capitalize on that coupon or incentive. So the first thing you do when you're executing these campaigns is you set parameters with rules. what the targeting criteria is, et cetera, what the limitations are. So you're always going to have that. And then finally, you utilize the algorithms to really refine which, offer do I show when, in which context and why. Because the last thing I want to do is extend, a discount to you when you're already progressing through that purchasing pipeline. So, the two work harmoniously. I think in the future, maybe I would say 60 to 70% of what happens on the site will be refined or helped or guided by algorithms, with 30 to 40% being more of the art and the presentation of the brand, which you don't want an algorithm to do.
Okay. Well, being on the inside of the data collection and the deployment and the results, what kind of interesting things have you seen, behavior-wise, results-wise? Stuff that's not proprietary, obviously, but what kind of things have you seen that are curious or cool?
It definitely varies by industry and use case. A couple things we learned, and maybe I'll rely on, I'll say, pooled learnings first. The same reason that the Netflix DVD algorithm didn't work for their streaming business is what we're increasingly learning, that maybe your digital targeting algorithms are not optimized for omni-channel context. In other words, we have a number of intelligent algorithms so that if you're solely shopping online versus you're standing in the department, we'll rely on different AI and targeting rules because the way you shop is different. So that's probably one, is that it's not just about the algorithm, but about the context and kind of when you use it. The other one that I would say is, pretty consistent is, not sparsity, but, not overdoing what's on the page, always having, when we run multivariate tests, and we distill the outcomes of, which test won and why, I would say as we genericize it, it's, eliminating noise, eliminating friction, going with, frequently the simplest models are those that have the highest, win rates in an optimization scenario. And, that's tough for a lot of these big sites because everyone wants to if you're talking about, a multi-brand experience, everyone wants to recommend their product, and, that noise creates fatigue and slows it down. Those are probably the two biggest things we've learned.
Well, I know from doing, websites and stuff myself for a while, here's what I've seen. I don't know if it's accurate, but it seems like the average conversion rate for website e-commerce stuff's like 1%. And if you get to 2 or 3%, that's amazing. That's really high. How much of a lift have you seen, and what kind of numbers are you working with? I know it depends on the industry and the clients, but, what are some ballpark numbers and improvements you've seen?
And it really, of course, it ranges from, number one, are you going from you had nothing to maybe an incremental improvement, and how are you improving, again, your data pool, your targeting rules, et cetera. But typically what we like to strive for and we see is within, your merchandising panes, trying to see an increase in conversion and click-through on those areas of maybe 10 to 20%. So again, I'm not saying the whole site will convert, will improve conversion, but, engaging customers to start considering the cross-sells, considering upsells. Typically I'll say, if you're talking about $100 million retailer and you increase their average AOV or conversion by just 0.1%, you've done pretty well. But it really varies. In some of the smaller firms, we've literally doubled their site conversion and AOV, and that's typically when they're moving from more of a completely manual approach to automated approaches.
Well, what are some of the biggest mistakes you see companies make or brands make? Maybe a B2B example or a B2C example, or a rule, or a guideline for them.
Um, I'll give you one across industries. So I think, and maybe I'm probably going to get the quote wrong, but something Steve Jobs said, which was you've got to start with the customer experience, not the technology, but you work backward to the technology. So I think the first mistake is sometimes you see companies too excited about maybe the art of the possible, and not really thinking about holistically how different technologies are going to actually improve the customer experience, whether it's IoT, conversational commerce, whatever. And let's just give you a simple example. If you're talking about Alexa or chat, best thing that you can do with that type of service is your maybe more mundane, Whisma, where's my order, right? Instead of trying to sell maybe an outfit through that. And, so the first one is don't lose track of your customers. And then I'd say the other one is kind of equally aligned with that is, one of the interesting things about the industry over the past, say, 2 decades is there is always a technology of the day, right? So, whether it's Web 2.0, it could be native apps, progressive web apps, the list really goes on. But, consistently what we see is you basically have, all of these new technologies and these shiny objects. And what I would say is history repeats itself. So, while it's great if you have kind of a lab or an innovation initiative that can operate at the fringe and roll these into deployments. I guess my recommendation in general is that, as a company, you don't always want to be on that bleeding edge because, the platforms will catch up, the pendulum will swing back, and you'll have an opportunity then to, rather than chasing all of these shiny objects, better leveraging, those technologies as they've achieved scale.
Okay. Yeah, I was just thinking about my experience with different companies. You can work on the front end of the process where you're evaluating them and they can show up really well there. So you're more likely to become a customer. And then what I see more often, unfortunately, is the back end, after I'm a customer, or I'm not a customer, then they'll spend all this effort chasing me or enticing me with stuff, but they didn't do a good job on the front end, so I never became a customer,
Exactly.
So I can see how both parts are super important, and I just wonder which one brands tend to fail at more, which ones they want to do or they don't think is important. I guess that was my curiosity.
Yeah, I guess I would say there is, probably the reality is, and again, different stat, but 73% of shoppers are cross-channel, yet only 8% of brands are able to deliver a rich cross-channel experience. So right now, I think the number one area of where brands are missing the mark is, they're failing to truly operate as an omni-channel enterprise. And with Magento, that's one of the things and some of the capabilities we've rolled out that, we're taking on to solve. But in terms of the marketplace, I still think there's a lot of room for improvement there.
Yeah, well, so with the addition of Magento, the takeover, what are companies and brands and customers of yours going to experience now that's different than before? What is new stuff that's coming to the table?
Well, so we're still in integration planning, so I can't comment too deeply on the roadmap, but I think, the core vision for us is to make every moment shoppable and, to really seamlessly bring, that commerce capability all the way up to the point of consideration. And so, let's talk about some of the things we discussed, right? So if you're thinking about advertising and, that retargeting ad now can become a shoppable ad unit. So you never even have to, on a third-party site, you could just click and buy. And all the way through, each phase, what customers can do now is if you look at Adobe is unique with our advertising, Sensei, our DMP, our targeting platform, our, those elements. It's, we're really trying to make that experience, number one, more frictionless, more contextual. And again, to answer your question directly, every element of the experience to kind of infuse that commerce capability. And did you happen to attend the Adobe Summit?
No, I wasn't able to make it. What were some of the highlights there?
Well, one of the things we showed, which was pretty cool, is kind of a glimpse into our view of the future. And so my group created a set of microservices now that we're using to integrate with Magento as well. But it was exactly what I just mentioned, which is the ability to make any image. So create 90% of the world's creatives and brands use Adobe Photoshop. And so now it's a pretty significant number, right, that we haven't monetized.
Yeah.
And so now, if you think about it, it'd be great to be able to actually turn all of those images into opportunities to transact. And so what we did is we showed how to make an image a shoppable image, transactional, whether it's on your site or a third party through a single click. So if you think about it, yeah, it's pretty exciting. And we're still in the early phases. It's called a sneak, so it's a view into the future. But if you're a blogger and you're blogging about, professional blogger, photojournalist, you're, blogging about your trip across the North Pole or down to a remote beach, you can now turn that, picture of you into a shoppable opportunity. Or if you're a media platform, even instead of selling clicks, now you can sell conversions. So, I think the opportunity out there, if you look at who Adobe is at our core, which is, empowering the creative community and empowering marketers in new ways, it's not just making commerce more frictionless and effective. I think there are completely new ways that we can transform how marketers and the industry thinks about making moments shoppable. And that, that's what our CEO, the vision that he's articulated, and it gets pretty exciting when you get into those use cases.
Yeah, I guess if you had a whole bunch of companies that were using your platform, you could have a add to Adobe cart button or something on these ads so that people can, as they're going around the web, they can put stuff, maybe, this is my idea, but, they can put something into a common, trusted checkout platform, such as, let's say, Adobe, and just check out there without having to go to these sites and buy the items for the sites.
That's a great idea. We'll have to follow up on that one.
Yeah, there you go. I bet you if you don't, Amazon's going to, try something like that. But anyway, so yeah. Well, very cool.
Yeah.
Well, so what's the best way for interested parties to contact you? It sounds like Adobe is really going to be making a lot of strides in this area. So, brands need the help. What's the best way to get in contact?
Well, I think the first one would be, we regularly post to our blog. So both the Adobe and Magento blogs, you'll be able to go there for regular updates. And then, clearly I'm a geek. I love this stuff. So, feel free to email me. My email is my last name. It's Denger, Denger, @adobe.com. Or you can find me on LinkedIn. And, I think there's so many exciting opportunities and use cases. So I love to hear from, the listeners out there what your thoughts are, and, if there are any opportunities that you see.
Well, very good. Well, Errol, I really appreciate you coming on the call. Thanks so much.
My pleasure, and thank you so much for your time today. Hopefully we can do an update in a year and talk about where we've gone over the past year. But it's going to be an exciting time.
You have been listening to Almost Here, Around the Corner Future Technology podcast with Richard Jacobs. Subscribe to this podcast, post a review to discover more future technologies that are poised to transform our lives for better or worse, such as Bitcoin, artificial intelligence, 3D printing, blockchain, virtual reality, and more.